Once there was an explosion.
In the original Death Stranding, dead bodies turn into massive explosions. This is true in cutscenes and in lore. It's the reason that the world of Death Stranding is covered in gaping craters, a fact writ large across the simulated space. Dead bodies turn into ghostly BTs swallow up human beings, and then a void out, a massive explosion. It's true in cutscenes, it's true in lore, and it's true mechanically. If you, the player, kill someone in Death Stranding, you have a limited time frame to incinerate their corpse. Miss the deadline and you get a void out and a game over. Written into lore, confirmed by code, dead bodies turn into massive explosions.
Guns make bodies, and bodies make craters.
In Death Stranding 2, dead bodies turn into massive explosions sometimes. It's still true in the lore of the game that dead bodies make craters, but that fact is no longer mechanically real. If you kill someone in Death Stranding 2 and leave their body to necrotize, you get an unhappy text message from somebody who took care of the problem on your behalf, and you lose some likes. So the player of Death Stranding 2 is still told dead bodies turn into massive explosions, but when it matters the most, when the player is in control, moving and acting and making decisions, embodied in simulated space, the actual cost of taking a life becomes trivial. I love and cherish Death Stranding 2. I do. But the original Death Stranding did something very bold with its handling of virtual violence, something truly special. Death Stranding 2 took a safer route, one laden with contrivances and conveniences. And so, here I sit, racked with mixed, conflicting feelings. I kind of hate loving this game. It's difficult to engage with the full breadth of the gaming medium if you don't have the stomach for virtual violence. It's not that video games are inherently violent. There are multiple genre traditions and rich subcultures within the medium that eschew violence completely. You could easily play 50 incredible video games every year for the rest of your life without ever aiming an assault rifle or equipping a sword. But if you want to engage with the medium broadly, even those non-violent outliers exist in conversation with, share context with, the violent majority. In some video games, violence is basically the whole point. In others, it's an unconscious default. Still other games attempt to comment on their violence, to varying degrees of success. In whichever form it may take, simulated violence makes up a huge portion of the medium's history. It is very often the thing you are doing when you play a video game. And to put it more bluntly, to be a little more honest, it's difficult to engage with the gaming medium if you can't enjoy enacting some of that violence. Unleashing the Omnislash, squashing the Goomba, slicing up Melania. If all of it is pulling teeth, if none of it ever feels good or satisfying to you, then engaging with the medium's broader history is liable to be a somewhat joyless experience. Violence is a major part of the medium's history, but so is interrogating and subverting violence. And if you want to understand that history of subversion, then you have to understand Hideo Kojima. By some accounts, Hideo Kojima isn't a hard man to understand. As a kid, he was raised on a diet of pure cinema, raised to idolize so-called auteurs. As an adult, he was part of a generation of young Japanese creatives who got churned out of their intended careers and folded into the nascent medium of video games. Think Yoshinori Kitase and Toshihiro Nagoshi. Kojima brought his eclectic interests and cinematic eye to the medium, and then Police Nuts? Kept you waiting, huh? They deleted PT, Bing Bang Boom, Death Stranding. Of course, the truth is more complicated. Yes, the myth of the cinematic auteur haunts Kojima's career like a specter. It seems to be a big part of why he maintains such strict creative control over his projects, why he fixates on casting beloved figures from cinema for his games, both actors and directors. But he brings much more to his games than a love of prestige-coded camera work. Although he's sometimes derided for leaning on genre tropes, Kojima's use of recognizable pop culture iconography is part of how he establishes expectations for the player, in attempt to mitigate a fundamental tension he recognizes in the medium. Given the player's active role, Kojima is sensitive to the fact that the player becomes a much more active creative collaborator in video games than they do in other media. The author doesn't have to worry about whether the detective will investigate for clues, and the filmmaker doesn't have to worry whether the action hero will jump into the fray. But a game designer must relinquish some level of control to the collaboration of the player. And so Kojima primes his collaborators with genre tropes with which they're familiar. In this game, your role is hard-boiled detective. In this game, your role is action hero. Once the player is sufficiently primed, Kojima can direct them through virtual worlds that reflect not just the films he's seen, but the world as he understands it.
僕の両親がですね、1930年生まれで、日本で空襲とかにあってますし、戦争を体験しているので、子供の頃からそういう、反戦の思想というかそういうのはずっとこう教育されてましたんで、僕は戦争コンパクトゲームを作るときに、その、親からもらったものを、ゲームで、ある程度表現したいということで、その反戦反核というのを、メタルギアでは、言っています。
That's why we push to have Metal Gear developed as a black project.
Black project?
Secret projects paid for by the Pentagon's black budget. You can avoid a lot of red tape and get a great lead time on your weapons production. And no one can bother you. Not even those bleeding heart liberals on the Military Oversight Committee.
You can't prove there's allegory in this.
In the violent world of action games, Kojima's legendary Metal Gear series has always been a meaningful subversion of the norm. By emphasizing stealth, still a fairly novel concept at the time of the series' inception, Kojima created a virtual world in which violence was a last resort, in which unholstering your gun was a kind of failure, proof that you got caught. Some installments of the series went out of their way to punish that failure. In one memorable section of Metal Gear Solid 3, a haunted river is populated by the ghosts of every enemy the player has killed up to that point, an unnerving penalty for players who leaned on violence rather than learning stealth. And that mechanical emphasis on the high cost of violence resonated thematically with the stories Kojima wanted to tell, stories of callously discarded soldiers and corrupt war machines. At the same time, the Metal Gear series began as a stealth action series with players primed to play as Hollywood action heroes. And there is no peaceful Snake. Your work in MGS always involves a lot of firearms and explosives, concussions, and blood. Even as the stealth format penalized wanton run-and-gun mayhem, these were still fundamentally stories about combat and war. In 2015, Konami kicked Kojima to the curb, and at that point he saw two options. One, retire, or two, make another game. But the only reason not to retire, the only reason it would be worth it to make another game, would be the chance to make something truly new.
The rope, along with the stick, are two of mankind's oldest tools. The stick to keep the bad away, the rope used to bring the good toward us. They were our first friends, of our own invention. Wherever there were people, there were the rope and the stick.
When Kojima read Abe's description of the rope and the stick, he became fixated on that dichotomy. He'd been making action games for decades, games about the sticks we use to keep the bad away. That was old hat. Instead, Kojima wanted to try making a game about the ropes we use to connect, and that game was Death Stranding. Mechanically and narratively, the game is lousy with ropes, an embarrassment of ropes. Phantom umbilical cords, rope-based ID technology, ropes binding not cities across the United Cities of America. Connections on connections, links on links, the good all brought together. This time, you're not primed to be an action hero. In fact, you're explicitly warned against it.
Guns make bodies, and bodies make craters.
Instead, you're primed to be a delivery man, trekking across a world fraught with perils both natural and surreal to bring packages from point A to point B. Your delivery work is critically important in the world of Death Stranding, which has been ravaged by a disaster that's driven people into isolation within their homes. The quarantined survivors depend on delivery workers to survive.
Thankfully, that's never happened in the real world. Phew!
Along your journey, you share the structures you build with other players, and you get to use some of theirs in turn. You can quietly remove shared structures from your game or shower them with likes, interactions that form a miniature social network in which positive engagement is basically the only kind of engagement there is. What emerges from these design choices and plot devices is a singular experience. It's more than a thematic nod to pacifism or a shift in emphasis. Death Stranding is a radically different experience from other big-budget action games. Your time is spent plotting routes, cresting hills, evading threats, surviving plunges, getting jump-scared by Conan, and linking lonely strangers into a real community. A handful of times, the game insists you use the stick instead of the rope, as in your confrontations with Cliff Unger, played by the unethically handsome Mads Mikkelsen.
Give me face, 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 yeah! Your face card never declines, my god! Eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it!
After avoiding combat for most of the game, these gunfights feel awkward and clumsy, which is exactly right for the story Death Stranding is telling. This is not the language your protagonist speaks, not the way he moves through the world. He's a rope guy. On this point, Kojima is characteristically unsubtle.
No, it's just like any other cliff. Dividing people was the only thing I was ever good at. But not you, Sam. You bring people together.
By forcing just enough awkward mandatory combat into the game, Kojima builds to the ultimate misdirect. He's been priming players for years, acculturating them to their roles within his virtual worlds. He knows how to guide his dance partners, the collaborators holding the controllers. We trust him, and he trusts us. For complicated reasons, your mother figure is in charge of destroying the world. She drops this news on you like a ton of chiral printed bricks and gives you a choice. Stand by her side and watch the world end, or kill her and avert the apocalypse. The camera dollies back into player control and the targeting reticle pops up. Kojima has primed you. It's time to shoot. In any other game, it would be time to shoot. But Death Stranding isn't any other game. If you've been paying attention to the story Kojima has been telling, you already know that your gun is not the answer. You don't need to fire a bunch of useless bullets into the extinction entity, don't need to see the game over screen to know that you're not a stick guy. You're a rope guy. Instinctively, you holster your weapon, run up to the big bad, and embrace her. The final boss in a video game is a test of mastery and fluency. Do the verbs come naturally to you? Can you improvise new sentences on the fly? Have you successfully picked up what the game has been putting down? There's a big, scary fight with a ghost whale at the end of Death Stranding, which looks a lot like a classic final boss, but it isn't. Not really. The whale tests your fluency with gunplay, which, in the scope of Death Stranding, is a minigame. The real test, the real final boss, is this. Have you picked up what Death Stranding has been putting down? Will you recognize the moment it's time to cast the stick aside? It's one of my favorite moments in any video game. Player priming and narrative and theme are all working in perfect harmony, guiding the attentive player to a moment of radical compassion. You say no to the tens of thousands of shooting games that came before. You say yes to a new way. And that's what Death Stranding is, a completely novel way forward for action games that want to tell new kinds of stories. Through the wilds, a new path was laid. But Death Stranding 2 didn't walk it. I didn't watch the trailers for Death Stranding 2. The trailers for the original Death Stranding captured my imagination. The brokenness and melancholy of the world moved me, and I yearned to understand the surreal, mysterious imagery. Who is he? What is that? Why is the esophagus baby inside my esophagus being a baby? Everything I saw in those trailers was obscured and unnamed. Hyped and hooked, I played and adored the original Death Stranding right when it first released, in all of its bizarre and convoluted glory. I felt almost as excited about the trailers for Death Stranding 2 as I was for the game proper, but when they first rolled out, I was slammed across the face with an unhappy realization. I knew who they were. I knew what this meant. I wasn't getting intrigued, I was just skipping ahead, reading perfectly legible story beats years in advance. I wanted obscure mystery, not sneak peeks. And so I swore off the promotional materials, the trailers and the teasers and the articles and the interviews. I wanted to know as little about the story of DS2 as I knew about the original. And because I dodged the entire promotional cycle for Death Stranding 2, I missed all the whispers and the rumblings. Kojima Productions had a warning for returning players, and I never heard it. Kojima told the gaming press point blank that the sequel would be more violent. The returning actors said the same thing.
I felt like the first game, there was something very passive about it, something very open and calm about it, and I feel like this one has a bit more violence in it.
Players tuned into the press cycle were prepped for the change, ready for the bloodshed. But unaware and uninformed as I was, it dawned on me gradually, in steps, while I walked through the world of DS2. I was immediately given special guns with special bullets that wouldn't technically kill anybody, and I was immediately prompted to use them. Weird.
Justin, this may be unconventional. I may have to use the teleport gun.
Beam them to the place safe!
Beam them to the safety zone!
I stuck to the rope path, stealthed past the enemies, and kept playing. I skipped past side missions that asked me to neutralize enemies, waiting for some third option to appear. But stubborn though I was, the game's nudges towards violence got stronger and stronger, until at last I was given an ultimatum, a story-critical mandatory mission with an unambiguous objective: shoot a bunch of dudes. It was a wild departure from the original, a change that called a lot of attention to itself, and I began to suspect that Kojima and his team were setting up some larger point, some broader commentary. After all, the first game used the battles against Cliff Unger to characterize a dying violent ideology through gameplay mechanics, and to set up a climactic misdirect. The more I played DS2, the more the game started turning to the fourth wall and winking about its new, more violent style. Literally winking.
Looks like you decided to trade in that rope for a stick this go-around. Well, I suppose even a porter has to pull the trigger from time to time.
My anticipation mounted. Where was all of this going? What kind of punchline was the game setting up? What was it all going to mean? Basically, it didn't mean anything. Sure, you find out there's an evil plot to proliferate firearms, and there are some passing comments about the prevalence of guns in the United States. But your own violence isn't interrogated or challenged by that context. After all, the baddies in the original had guns too. The difference here is only that the game now asks you, in myriad ways, to start firing back. Your combat skills are nurtured, rewarded with perks and dopamine hits. Your arsenal expands with an increasingly absurd list of non-lethal assault rifles and machine guns and grenade launchers. Yes, non-lethal grenade launchers. You get mission after mission asking you not to retrieve an object from an enemy base, but to mow down an enemy base just for the sake of mowing it down. And this radical departure goes mostly unremarked upon within the text. The first game had so much to say about violence, but the second game stays silent. It comes across as though DS2 is frightened to look too closely at what it's doing with violence. This engenders a strange dissonance, not just with the previous game, but between the fiction and the reality of Death Stranding 2.
Video games are real in that they consist of real rules with which players actually interact, and in that winning or losing a game is a real event. However, when winning a game by slaying a dragon, the dragon is not a real dragon but a fictional one. To play a video game is therefore to interact with real rules, while imagining a fiction.
When I play Super Mario Bros., I'm engaging with a fictional world through rules, restrictions, and affordances that are real. Mario cannot talk with a Goomba, or hover over pits, or set himself on fire with a fire flower. He can run, and he can jump. He isn't a real person, but he is a real coded object, a binary sequence engraved on a chip in community with other binary sequences, enemies and items and physics. It's a fiction that Mario is a plumber, but it's a fact that when his coordinates cross a death plane, the variable for lives increments down. When an enemy dies in the original Death Stranding, it is a fact that after a set amount of time spent ignoring the problem, the player is hit with a game over. It's a fiction that shades from the world of the dead have been beached in the world of the living, but the in-code mechanical consequences for killing align closely with the story told by the game. Then, in Death Stranding 2, the same fictional rules remain, but they're no longer reflected in reality, in the actual rules and affordances that govern your actions. And without that mechanical grounding, without those rules engraved in binary, the fiction loses the weight and authority of the real. No, in the real rules and mechanics of Death Stranding 2, death and violence are inconsequential. In those rules and mechanics, taking a shotgun blast to the face is no more than a mild inconvenience.
Now, let me get out ahead of something. No, Death Stranding 2 is not a purely realistic, hard sci-fi kind of game. There are flying whales, possessed dolls, and rainstorms that make you old. But in addition to fantastical elements, there are also mundane gameplay features that draw on our intuitions about the real world. In DS2, birds exploit forest fires to hunt. Rain from upstream floods rivers downstream. Falling off a cliff is bad for you.
Are you okay, Sam?
Get it together.
So I'm not going to tell you that DS2 teaches or purports to teach how guns work in the real world. It obviously does not. But the guns in DS2 draw on real-world intuitions about less lethal firearms that are not only wrong, but dangerously so. In real life, birds do exploit forest fires to hunt. Rain upstream really does flood rivers downstream, and falling off a cliff really is bad for you. But in real life, so-called less lethal ammunition is not an alternative to violence. It's just more violence.
In 2020, in the city where I live, police shot protester Sam Kirsch in the face with a beanbag round, breaking bones in his jaw, in his nose, and around his left eye. He endured 11 surgeries trying to save that eye, but he lost it anyway. Chronic nerve pain from the injury still makes it difficult to wear an eye patch. In 2020, in the city where I live, police shot protester Anthony Evans in the face with a pellet round, shattering his lower jaw into pieces. Doctors had to wire his jaw shut for 2.5 months. The titanium plate in his jaw is permanent. Elsewhere, this past January in Phoenix, police surrounded Terrell Clay and rained less lethal munitions down on him. 4 hours later, he was dead. This happens over and over and over again. In one systematic review, 15% of people shot with less lethal rounds suffered permanent disabilities, blindness, and amputations, and many people were killed outright. But police across the world keep using these rounds. They were all over LA this year, along with pepper spray and tear gas, both of which can have lasting health impacts of their own.
Just this year, right here in Austin, I was even masked up, it felt like shit.
Guns in fiction don't work the way they do in real life, and a lot of the time, that's fine. Suppressors don't turn gunshots into whispers, but spy movies are fun. And if somebody goes through life thinking that suppressed guns are as loud as snapped twigs, they'll probably be okay. But what happens when people go through life thinking rubber bullets and beanbags aren't deadly? What happens when those people sit on the jury for a cop who blew some guy's head apart with less lethal rounds? What happens when those people show up to protests without proper protection?
Hideo Kojima didn't shoot anybody, and his video game didn't make anybody shoot anybody. That is not what I'm saying here. What we call less lethal rounds are part of this larger American fantasy that with enough strength and skill and tech, we can control violence, do the exact right amount of violence, Not just the myth of a sharpshooter who can shoot the gun right out of a baddie's hand. A new fantasy of mass-produced weapons for our boys in blue to fire gentler, kinder headshots at point-blank range. But in real life, violence is unpredictable. It is by its nature a disruption of order and normalcy. When you engage in real violence, you don't know how far it's going to go, how much damage will be done before it's finally over. Death Stranding 2 still wants to be a game where violence has tragic consequences. And it wants to be a thrilling, engaging third-person shooter. The compromise it strikes, arming you with special, harmless bullets, presents the player with statements about violence that are fundamentally and distractingly untrue. A lot of video games make similar compromises and similarly untrue statements about violence. A lot of my absolute favorite video games do that. It wouldn't stand out so much if Death Stranding 2 were the sequel to any other game. But Death Stranding isn't any other game.
The dramatic change in the sequel's attitude towards violence raises obvious questions about why the developers chose to make the change. It's something the developers, including Kojima, have spoken about at length. Unfortunately, they've spoken through two dense, obscuring layers. The context of a promotional cycle pitching the game to audiences, and the context of Kojima's very public career, his self-conscious auteur myth-making.
So, I'm not going to tell you definitively that the developers chose violence because of X, Y, or Z reason. I can't. But it's too fundamental a question to leave unexplored.
One possibility is that Death Stranding 2 changed tacks because of the polarized reception of the original game. Upon release, there were both adoring fans and review-bombing campaigns. There were critics who sang the game's praises and critics who hated Death Stranding with a passion.
I can only hope that this is the last Strand type game, because it is a complete and utter embarrassment.
Anecdotally, as someone who was very online and very keyed into the discourse when the original game released, fans and detractors started to form deeply entrenched camps. To fans, the detractors were all buffoons, too ignorant or too scared to try anything new. To detractors, the fans were a deluded cult who would worship dogshit if Kojima had stepped in it. Maybe this time, Kojima Productions wanted to put out a game that satisfied more players, not just one devoted faction. That theory runs up against Kojima's widely memed concern that Death Stranding 2 was looking too universally beloved among early playtesters. If we take that story at face value, Kojima was keen to keep the series polarizing, not to broaden its appeal. But can we take that story at face value? The anecdote, which Kojima has cast some doubt on himself, comes from composer Woodkid during the press hype cycle leading up to DS2's release, and it's a marketing team's dream. Kojima is such an oddball auteur that he's troubled by how much people love his new game, and the game is so good that they had to make it a little less good. So, geez, it sure sounds like you ought to buy the game right away.
I think some healthy skepticism is warranted, but Kojima did famously yoink the hero of Metal Gear Solid from that game's sequel, just to mess with players. He's made a lot of divisive choices with his video games. So whether or not he had a panic attack when playtesters gave DS2 10s across the board, was this new focus on violence really an effort to appease some haters? It doesn't track with his past, but it might track with his present.
I thought I could do anything if I was independent, but the reality is that I can't. I always think of other more weird stuff to make. But if I do that, and it does not sell, my studio will go bankrupt. I know all the staff. I know the families of the staff. I have this burden on my shoulders.
Kojima provided another explanation for the tone shift in a post-release interview with the Washington Post, wherein he compared the two Death Strandings to the first two Alien films. As Kojima explains, the first installments banked on mystery and the unknown, but with the monsters laid bare to the audience, the second installments needed to turn to the thrill of action instead of the thrill of mystery. At least regarding Aliens, Kojima and James Cameron are on the same page.
I didn't think I could outdo Alien for pure shock. Going into a movie theater on opening night, not knowing what to expect, the mystery, the wonder, and then the sudden shock and terror that film created, you can't beat that. So I had to come up with an end run around that would be equally entertaining for an audience, but in a different way. And I knew I could do action. jump off from the horror premise into what ultimately becomes an action film.
Personally, I'm unconvinced that the two sequels faced identical conundra. Alien is a 2-hour horror film about one monster, maintaining tension by drip-feeding shocking revelations about that monster. So Cameron's bind makes sense. An audience won't be surprised by the chestburster the second time around. You can't spin the same nickel twice. If you're gonna focus on the same monster, you have to do something new with it. And yes, Death Stranding 2 focuses largely on the same monsters and the same crisis. When I watched the first trailer for Death Stranding 2, I wasn't seeing mysterious and unexplained events anymore. I could parse the story beats with relative ease, but that feels like a choice, not something the developers were boxed into. By the end of the first game, contact had not been re-established between America and the rest of the world, and Death Stranding laid some pretty obvious seeds that the world could be bigger than the planet. Unlike Cameron, Kojima Studios weren't painted into a corner. They had a blank canvas the size of the universe.
The fact that Kojima's Alien analogy makes little sense to me doesn't mean it wasn't his actual reason. If Kojima truly felt that there was no mystery left in the Death Stranding, it might explain the direction he took in the sequel. But there's still one more explanation that I think is worth considering.
During the pandemic, Hideo Kojima thought he was going to die. The illness that brought him to the brink eventually subsided, but he developed severe eye pain. The notorious cinephile, the man who watched at least one movie per day every day, could no longer look at a screen. Entering his 60s rocked by illness and impairment, Kojima felt his own mortality in a new way. Even after returning to health, he could hear the clock ticking, understood that he had a limited number of projects left in his life before time ran out. This new perspective informed the development of Death Stranding 2. Some of the influence is easy to spot in the particulars. For example, like Kojima, whose hair thinned and fell out during his illness, Sam now has to mask the effects of time and aging on his hair. But more broadly, DS2 feels as much like a career retrospective as it does like a sequel to Death Stranding. If you ask any players familiar with some of Kojima's earlier games, they'll see the games that they know best reflected in Death Stranding 2. MGS5 players recognize the enemy base infiltration and the comfort of a familiar HQ. Old-school Metal Gear veterans will appreciate the 8-bit enemy sprites. The crimson-red ghost mechs might look familiar to Zone of Enders fans. Snatcher was deeply concerned about the eroding distinctions between humanity and technology. And I'm sure the 5 or 6 people who played Boktai recognize some Boktai nods too.
And no, the sun does not count as a Boktai reference.
Through the lens of a lifelong retrospective directed by a man rocked by his own mortality, there's just not as much room for Death Stranding in Death Stranding 2, crowded out as it is by the entire decade-spanning career that Kojima was busy reflecting on. But that's just my personal theory, the thing that happens to sound right to me. You can read Kojima's interviews, play his games, and decide for yourself what makes the most sense. But it's likely that none of us will ever know exactly and definitively why Kojima embraced violence in Death Stranding 2, or why he neutered its consequences. I mean, I can't get inside his head. I'm stuck here in mine. What I can describe with some authority is the way the violence felt, what it evoked in harmony with the overall story, the assonance between fiction and the real. Because, unintentionally or not, the place Sam is in his personal journey and the things he does to his enemies feel deeply connected. The original Death Stranding is a delivery game. Specifically, it's a game in which Sam Porter Bridges delivers a baby from his womb. Through wasteland and peril, he carries an unborn child in a cold mechanical womb all the way to the finale when the child is born. When Sam falls or flails or takes bullets to the chest, his unborn child cries. When Cliff Unger forces Sam into violent confrontations, he seeks to tear the baby from Sam's womb. The instinct evoked by the original Death Stranding is to shield, to protect, to avoid as much violence as possible and guard the unborn child you're carrying. In Death Stranding 2, Sam is grieving the child to which he gave birth. He carries his dead child's vacant afterbirth slung across his chest. His connection to the rest of the human species has been irreparably damaged, and so his turn towards violence feels like a turn not towards rage, but towards nihilism. What is there left to protect? When Sam falls or flails or takes bullets to the chest, a wail rings out from the afterbirth. A perverse reminder that nobody's actually in there anymore. So you get back up, march into the maelstrom, and keep on shooting. Nothing is real, nothing is here to stay. Nothing matters. Let the bullets fly. I'm not gonna belabor Gender 101 here. Trans men are men, some trans men get pregnant, and so there are some men who get pregnant and have children. It's not surprising that even imagery as unsubtle as this fails to register for some players, given how deeply femininity and pregnancy are interwoven in the cultural consciousness. But that's the game. Death Stranding is the story of Sam's pregnancy. I honestly appreciate the raw, numb grief evoked by the violence in the first few episodes of the game. However unintentionally, it coheres in a way that's not entirely dissimilar to the way the original game's non-violence coheres with Sam's sudden parenthood. But the evocation of grief isn't sustained across the game's running time. The story of Death Stranding 2 takes turns that I won't spoil here, turns that muddle the framing as I've described it. Sam's eventual healing does not run parallel to any real mechanical change in the way DS2 handles violence. And as that rift deepens between the fictional and the mechanical, the violence of the game feels less and less like an emergent facet of Death Stranding 2 as a story. More and more like something arbitrary and safe and pandering, a transplanted organ that does not truly belong. And that is wild. To use the words safe and pandering to describe this game of all games is absolutely wild. I did not play Death Stranding 2 a little. I played Death Stranding 2 a lot, and I loved it for its originality and its oddness. I can't stress this enough. I fuck with this game. Kojima is not known for his restraint, but Death Stranding 2 finds him at his most gleefully indulgent, drafting in every single person he thinks is cool for a cameo and coding in every fixation that captured his and the dev team's attention. The result is right up my alley, a game where the surprises are truly surprising, the shocks truly shocking. As the game reminds you over and over again, you don't know what to expect. Interdimensional server farms, and coffin-based hoverboards, and pizza-oriented martial arts, and peko, peko, peko.
Feel that speed!
The soundtrack, which you've been listening to a lot in this video, is fantastic. Unhinged moments of genre mayhem punctuate sublime road trip chill-out music, with Woodkid's procedurally complicated compositions heightening moments of action. But playing the game deep, dozens of hours after credits roll, sometimes it's also nice to just turn the music off. Drive through the night. Just tires on chiral-printed concrete. There's a commitment to friction and texture which, as a lover of simulated frustration, makes my heart skip a beat. The ground betrays your feet, and your feet betray your body. NPC porters stumble clumsily in front of your vehicle, as does the wildlife. One slip-up can send a delicate package tumbling down a mountainside. This is not a smooth world you glide across like a lubed-up marble. There are sharp pebbles here, and they will get stuck in your shoes. So you plan your routes carefully, stash a vehicle there in advance, build a way station there. Crunchy, crunchy logistics. Speaking of texture, the performances. Kojima's direction of actors is singular, and in their golf ball motion suits, far removed from the bleak, tar-drenched imagery of the game, those actors don't seem to operate on the same wavelength as the man running the show.
And then Hideo will go, okay, pick up the baby doll and cry. And you're like, what about? And he's like, and you cry because the strand of the strand, you're like, I don't know what any of that means. I'm very sorry. I trust you, but I don't know what that means. And then he's like, look up, a whale.
It's not the way you learn to direct actors in film school, but perhaps because it's so far from the norm, the resulting performances feature moments of unexpected vulnerability and immediacy. The kind of organic and natural stumbling cadence that often gets ironed out of a final cut. Norman Reedus wasn't in the puffy chair, but he is serving sublime mumblecore in this game.
Nice repair job, she's practically sparkling.
Kojima is often mocked for his lengthy cinematic cutscenes and the implication that he's an on-rails storyteller. But in actuality, the games he directs tend to be process-rich, procedurally intricate. That's especially true in Death Stranding 2, with its interplay between kit, weight, weather, topography, social networking, and more, a recipe for delightful emergent gameplay moments. Take the game's player-driven social network. All across the virtual space, you'll find life-saving shelters with 10 or 11 likes, right next to 100,000 like bridges which save you generously a third of a second. A quirk of the system that incentivizes slapstick bridges to nowhere. But as fun as those useless bridges may be, there's also great joy in constructing sound, reasonable infrastructure. As much as I love frustration for its own sake, I can't deny the payoff, the overwhelming relief of setting up a functioning zipline network in the mountains, breezing effortlessly past routes that once required slow, careful, and patient traversal. And when I spied a perfect spot for a jump ramp, then returned to find it liked by a big chunk of other players, I felt real satisfaction. I had a good idea, and it helped a bunch of people. How cool is that? It can't, and generally doesn't, go unremarked upon that Death Stranding 2 is a gorgeous video game. It's not just the polygon count or the particles. There's a majestic and rugged sprawl that's been achieved in this virtual space which reflects, meaningfully, some of nature's specific grandeurs. On a recent trip to New Zealand to visit family, it occurred to me how difficult it was to capture the fullness of natural beauty, or even a meaningful shred of it, with a camera. Even with all the beauty right there in my face, my attempts to bottle up a drop of it fell flat. And yet, although lead environment artist Takayuki Uchida was restricted in his travels by the pandemic, forced to survey the world through local surrogates with cameras, he captured a full draft. Even working remotely, he and his team captured an authentic taste of wild Australia and wild Mexico that defined, enriched, and enlivened much of the moment-to-moment experience of the game. I mean, what an accomplishment.
And the thing is, everything I've just said, all of it, applies to the violence too.
Rendered with remarkable detail, combat scans efficiently to the eye without losing its grit, and devolving into a Halo-like laser tag morass. It's satisfying to help out players struggling with combat, to take down an enemy base that was keeping somebody out there from finishing their missions. Combat is process-rich enough to produce great little emergent moments where the subsystems interact in unexpected ways. Enemies that drop their grenades and get hoisted by their own petards. And combat is packed with fun, idiosyncratic indulgences, laser beam guitars and goth-ass kaiju clashes. A smart, talented dev team made a great combat system, which I do enjoy.
And I wish I just felt that one emotion, but I don't. I feel two emotions.
I've got this stupid analogy stuck in my head, and the more I try to get away from it, the more neurons it occupies in my brain. But it's a cinematic analogy, and it's deeply self-indulgent, so for a video about a Kojima game, maybe it's perfect. What if Twin Peaks was the sequel to Mothlight?
In 1963, Stan Brakhage cut up a bunch of dead moths and spliced them onto celluloid. There were reasons he did it, personal, intimate reasons. I'll leave it to you whether you want to seek out what those reasons were. But it doesn't take any additional context to recognize that Mothlight is doing something fundamentally different with the film medium. The film reel has always been material, and its materiality is here foregrounded and amended, Not encoded with illusions, but encrusted with something dead. And you sit with that materiality as light pierces moth wings. Twin Peaks is bonkers and brilliant and singular, and I almost always have more fun watching it than I do watching Mothlight. I'm sometimes moved more deeply and sent down different, more fruitful paths of inspiration. But if Twin Peaks was somehow the sequel to Mothlight, well, that context would mean something. Because as bold and strange as Twin Peaks is, and as much as I love it, there's something truly radical that Mothlight is doing with the film medium, the absence of which would suddenly become a kind of hole in the center of Twin Peaks. The original Death Stranding is less abrasive than Mothlight, but maybe only just. Mothlight played to audiences acculturated to experimental filmmaking. Death Stranding was played by a gaming audience acculturated to frictionless polish and instant, ceaseless gratification.
I can only hope that this is the last Strand type game.
It was a confronting experience for a lot of people, and an eye-opening one for more than a few, specifically because of its combat-averse construction. And that context creates a hole, an absence, at the center of Death Stranding 2, a game that I love. It's worse than an unanswered question. It's an incomplete sentence, one that leaves me dangling. Pacifism has been replaced with ultraviolence because... One way, among several, that the Mothlight Twin Peaks analogy fails is that neither one of those stories connects with me as deeply or as personally as the world of Death Stranding. I'm not the destitute father that Stan Brakhage was, or the traumatized small-town every-girl that Laura Palmer was, but grappling with death and loss like Sam Porter Bridges and his band of survivors, it may not get more personal for me. As a teenager, my already shaky faith in Catholicism collapsed. Atheism felt really good at the time, firm and final, even when it was frightening to consider. Agnosticism felt like a cop-out back then, like a way to duck the question. And a question I could never hope to answer? At 17, I didn't believe such a thing existed. With every passing year, I understand more fully just how little I know, how small the pinhole is through which I glimpse the world. To play it knowing what happens after death feels ridiculous to me now, and honestly a little annoying. But when Death Stranding 2 says, "Death can't tear us apart," although I can't say I know that it's true, I do feel that it's true. It's not just a turn of phrase that I still feel the people I've lost here with me. They're as real and as present to me now as the nose on my face or the ground beneath my feet. It may be silly to try and guess what's on the other side of the shore, but I can't stop myself from guessing. And right now, my best guess is this. I probably won't be able to gaze back at the shore after I've crossed into the water. But at the same time, if I can forge true connections with people while I'm here, then no, I don't think death can tear us apart. If Death Stranding 2 didn't evoke all that, make me reflect on all of that, then I wouldn't have all these conflicted feelings about the game. I wouldn't kind of hate loving Death Stranding 2 if I didn't love it so much in the first place. Thank you so much for watching this video. Full citations, music credits, and all the footage sources are listed below in the video description. Believe it or not, I do not have the requisite technical skill to disassemble the code for Super Mario Bros. Myself. That was done by a user named Doppelganger, and you can look up their work online for yourself. You can search for Doppelganger SMB Dis, a comprehensive Super Mario Bros. Disassembly, and tragically SMB Dis is not a diss track recorded by Yoshi. Should be. I also want to thank my friend Uday, who's probably not watching this video in 2025 or 2026. He hasn't played Death Stranding yet, and it would be a crime to spoil the games for him. But November, the month when I did a lot of the work on this video, was bad. I had a really bad November. And Uday really saved the day, and I can't thank him enough. I'm not going to pretend to know what the next video is going to be. I have no idea. Probably another short review? We'll see. But until then, I did check with some reputable sources, and it is still not illegal to subscribe to my channel. Liking is still dicey, ringing the bell, don't recommend it, but subscribing, perfectly legal, perfectly legal. So, until next time, money is fake, arm the homeless.